Every working day, you spend up to 80% of your valuable, precious time organizing meetings. And those meetings are intended to help your manager and your team move their projects and their goals forward. The trouble is that they're doing the opposite. And my research shows that up to 50% of meetings are considered a waste of time. That means that 50% of your work organizing those meetings is also a waste of time. But what's worse is that these meetings and all that meeting organization is causing stress, frustration, and blocks, preventing you and your manager and your teams from getting your work done. So this session is going to give you meeting medicine. You never have to waste another moment of your precious time creating wasteful meetings, and you can focus your energies creating meetings that will give your manager and your team a sense of achievement and progress and move them forward. And I promise you, they're going to love you for it. My name is Dr. Madeleine de Hooch. I'm a medical doctor by training and a meetings doctor and executive coach by profession. And I hope that you enjoy this session. My goal is to give you tips and tools that you can implement straight away. I encourage you to watch the session again. And if you can, even watch it with your manager, because everything that I'm covering here is equally relevant for both you and your manager and your team. So let's look at the learning objectives for today. The session's going to be divided into 3 parts. Part 1 is all about awareness. Now, awareness raising is the first critical step because so often our meeting habits become habitual behaviors that we don't even notice. And we don't realize that some of the things we're doing or not doing are actually creating problems for ourselves down the line and the cause that our meetings are not being very effective. Once we've raised awareness of these problems, then we can choose to change them. And that's my meeting mantra for today, which is awareness is curative. Once we are aware of something, we can choose to change it. Then we can move on to part 2, which is where I'm going to share 4 meeting medicines. Now, these meeting medicines are extracted from over 15 years of international research by meeting experts, group dynamics experts, and companies like Google and Facebook. So we know that these 4 medicines that I've created for you work. And if you apply them and your manager applies them, you will get effective meetings. And being aware of these 4 medicines is really going to help you support your manager to help them have effective meetings. And again, they'll love you for it. Once we've done that, we can move on to part 3, which is all about prevention. Prevention is better than cure. And so I'm going to give you a tool that you and your manager can do together to prevent the meeting problems from arising in the first place. And if they do arise, you'll know already how to manage them. And finally, at the end of this session, I'm going to give you details about a resource that I've created for you, which is about how to find your superpower. When you tap into your superpower and your values, then you're really able to create a life of meaning and purpose and presence, both at work and at home. So if you'd like that, you can reach out to me and I'll give you the information at the end. So let's jump straight in with part 1. Now, this is where I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and I would love you to write your answers in the chat. Because when we share our experience publicly in the chat, then everybody else grows as a result. But some of the questions are going to require you to think. And so you might want to write down your answers on a piece of paper as well first, just to clarify your thoughts. And I already want to let you know that question 3, we will be using again in part 3. So please do keep your answers to question 3. Okay, let's dive straight in with question 1. And to answer this question, you'll probably need access to your calendar and your manager's calendar. So go ahead and get that ready so that you can answer this question. On a typical day, how many hours does your manager spend in meetings? Go ahead and write that down in the chat. Don't worry if you don't have time to answer all the questions in the time available. You can always watch the recording and get your answers down later. Now, question 2. When you're thinking about all the hours that your manager spends in meetings, that probably means that you are involved in doing a lot of meeting organization. There's things that you do before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. And when you think about all those things that you do, how many hours do you spend in meeting related tasks every day? That's question 2. Have a think and write that one down in the chat. And then we can move to question 3. So you're thinking about all the hours that you spend on meeting related tasks. And now I want you to think about your biggest pain points and frustrations about the work that you do that's related to meetings. Don't forget, you'll need to keep your answers to this. So please write your answers to this down on a piece of paper as well. Your biggest pain points or frustrations about the meeting related tasks that you undertake every day. Okie dokie. Moving on to question 4. Now, when you're looking at your answers to question 3, have a little thought experiment with yourself about what are the implications or ripple effects of those problems on you, on your work, and on your team. So, for example, I was speaking to a personal assistant recently, and she told me that one of her biggest frustrations is actually during the meeting. It's her computer which is used to share the screen. And all she has to do is just to press next for the slideshow. So that's her pain point and frustration. The ripple effect on her is that it makes her stressed because she can't get her work done. And so the ripple effect on her team is that there are delays and they get angry because she can't deliver because her computer is being used up in the meeting. So that's one example. Have a little think about your own, what you wrote down and what the implications or ripple effects could be on the problems that you identified. Give you a little moment to think about that. And then we will move on to the last question, which is question 5. Now, if you're watching this again with your manager, they can answer this for themselves, but you can already answer it for them by putting yourselves in their shoes. So I want you to pretend you are your manager. Use everything you know about them, their roles and their responsibilities, their goals, their aspirations, and think about what it's like for them to attend the meetings that they attend on a daily basis. And try and imagine what are the biggest pain points and frustration from their perspective about the meetings that they attend. So have a think, write your answers in the chat. And I hope you're beginning to see how much time both you and your manager are spending on meeting relating tasks, and also the kinds of problems that are repeated in these tasks and the implications of those problems on your work and on your wellness. Okay, so now that we've got awareness of your meeting habits and your meeting culture, we can move on to step 2, which is where I'm going to share 4 meeting medicines to cope with some of these problems. And that's the acronym we're going to use to remember the 4 meeting medicines, the word COPE. Another way I'd like you to look at it is to think of meetings like a sailboat. So the sailboat is the meeting, and it's getting all the passengers, which are the meeting participants, safely to the destination on time so that they can achieve their goals and move forward with their lives. So let's have a look at these 4 meeting medicines. Now, the C stands for captain. Every sailboat needs a captain to get the passengers safely to the destination on time, and every meeting needs a meeting leader in order to get results. And meeting science tells us that the captain makes or breaks the meeting. So what does the captain need to do in order to make an effective meeting? Well, that moves us on to the O, the P, and the E. And those are the captain's job. And those are where you can support your manager to really get effective meetings. Now, the O stands for outcome. Just like your sailboat needs to know its destination so that it doesn't get lost at sea, your meeting needs to know the intended outcome so that it can actually achieve that result. And it's the captain's job to articulate the outcome. And this is where people often forget. And this is one of those meeting habits that people fall into. They forget or they fail to articulate the intended outcome of the meeting. So if you're multitasking at the moment, this is where I encourage you to stop and listen, because this is where you can have the biggest impact on your managers' meetings and your team's meetings, by getting them to articulate the intended outcome of the meeting. So how can you do that? Well, there's 2 places where the outcome needs to be written down. The first place is in the meeting invite, so that when I'm invited to your meeting, I know what the intended outcome is. And I can decide whether I'm going to participate in your meeting or whether I'm not, because I've got more pressing things to take care of. It also allows me to start thinking about how I can contribute to that intended outcome. So if your manager has forgotten to articulate the outcome, then you can just ask them. You can say something like, so Sarah, I'm going to send the meeting invitations to everybody. What should I write down as the intended outcome of the meeting? And just by asking the question, Sarah will actually start thinking, oh yes, what is the intended outcome of this meeting? And you can write that down in the meeting invite. The second place where the outcome needs to be written down is on the agenda, or it needs to be said verbally at the beginning of the meeting so that people are reminded what this meeting is for and why we're here. And again, you can support your manager when they're asking you to prepare the agenda by creating a template which always has a gap for the outcome to be filled in, so that you never forget to ask your manager what the intended outcome is, and your manager never forgets to think about what the intended outcome is. This is the most critical step to meeting success. Now, everything I've just said is when your manager is the meeting leader. Sometimes your manager is actually just a passenger on the ship. They've been invited to participate in somebody else's meeting. And here, what you can do to support them is when they get an invitation to attend a meeting, you can ask the meeting organizer, George, thanks for inviting Sarah to your meeting. She's struggling with some competing priorities at the moment. Can you help me understand what the intended outcome of this meeting is so that she can make an informed decision about whether to attend or not? Now, I know I'm being provocative because many people I work with find it very difficult not to accept a meeting invitation. But I hear so many people telling me I'm in more than 7 or 8 or 9 hours of meetings a day, and half of them are irrelevant for me. Managers should not be wasting their time attending meetings that are not relevant. And they can make an informed decision about whether to attend a meeting or not only if they know what the intended outcome of the meeting is. So I really encourage you to create this good meeting habit in your organization. And it's amazing how much impact you can have as a personal assistant in making that behavior change, because it happens almost without noticing. You just include it in the template, include it in the meeting invitation, and it happens magically. Now we come to the P. So the P stands for process and plan. And again, this is an area where you can really support your manager, because often this is where they also need a bit of extra help. So it's very difficult to reach your intended outcome if you don't know how you're actually going to get there. If we think about the sailboat, the captain always charts the course before they set off, so that they can avoid obstacles or bad weather events on the way. And it's the same with meetings. The meeting leader has to think about how they're going to arrive at their intended outcome beforehand. So, for example, if the intended outcome is a decision on something, then the meeting leader will have wanted to have thought about, how are we going to reach that decision? Are we going to have a vote? Are we going to go for consensus? Or is it really that I want to have a list of ideas, and then as the project leader, I will make the decision, the final decision? I need to think about that in advance, and that's the process. It's difficult to do that if I don't take the time to plan. And again, you can help your manager do the process and the plan by asking questions. So you could say, Sarah, for your upcoming meeting, you want to get a decision on this topic. Would you like me to set up a voting poll for you, so that we can have an online poll during the meeting? By asking the question, you're opening up that awareness in their minds that they could actually think about how they're going to achieve their goals. So let's move on to the E, which stands for equal opportunity to speak. Now, meeting science tells us that decisions where there is diversity of thought and different perspectives are better decisions and work better in the real world. And again, the captain has to think about, how are we going to get diversity of thought? And that comes down to the number of people that you're going to have in your meeting. The magic number here is 7. If you have 7 people or less in your meeting, it's quite easy to ask individual people to give us their thoughts, and you've got time to do that. If you've got more than 7, then it becomes very difficult to go around and hear everybody's thoughts, and you have to use other tools. And again, if you're multitasking, put your work down and pay attention, because this is where you can really make a massive difference into the productivity and the effectiveness of meetings, by helping your manager think about how they're going to get equity of thought. And again, it's the transformative power of questions which make you the change agent when it comes to meetings. So you could ask the question, pretend Sarah's your manager. You could say, Sarah, we have quite a lot of people in this meeting tomorrow. Would you like me to help you check for when people raise their hands and they have a question? Or would you like me to keep an eye on the chat for you, so that you can ask people to write down their thoughts in the chat, and we can gather all that information and share it back to them? That's another idea. Or you could say, would you like me to prepare a poll or a survey or a questionnaire that people have to fill in either before the meeting or during the meeting, so that we can get everybody's thoughts? By asking questions, Sarah can say no, it's her decision, she doesn't feel threatened, but it also creates an open loop in her mind where she starts thinking about, oh yeah, How am I going to achieve my goal? Oh yes, how am I going to get equal opportunity and hear everybody's thoughts? It's a very subtle way of really being a change agent. Ask questions. So that's the end of part 2. We've come across 4 meeting medicines, and we've looked at how you can support your manager implement these 4 meeting medicines. And when you do, you will see your meetings transform. And you'll also see that you don't waste time creating wasteful meetings. You spend your energy creating meetings that really make a difference. And at the same time, you become invaluable to your manager and your team because you're helping them get their work done. Now we're going to move to part 3, which is all about prevention. You're going to decide how to prevent some of these common problems from happening. And because some of them will still happen sometimes, you're also going to look at what you can do when they happen, so you know in advance how you're going to manage them, and then the implications can be minimalized. Now, we haven't got much time to do this activity in this session, so we're only going to use your answers to question 3. If you decide to watch the recording and do this activity with your manager and your team, then I would set aside at least 45 minutes to an hour to have a discussion around this topic and use your answers to question 3, 4, and 5 so that you can really have a team discussion. All right, so let's jump in. Let me share question 3 so that you're reminded what it was. Here it is. What are your biggest pain points and frustrations about meeting related tasks? And you're going to take the answers that you wrote down and you're going to insert them into a template which I've created for you. And remember, we're looking at it from 2 perspectives. We know the problems are going to happen because they always do happen. So first, we're going to look at how we can prevent them from happening. But recognizing that life happens and some of those problems are going to arise even with our preventative strategies, we're going to decide upfront what we can do about it when they do happen so that we can minimize their effects. And so I've drafted 2 questions for you, and all you have to do is fill in the blank. And the wonderful thing about questions, as I've said throughout this, is that they are transformative, because the human brain cannot resist answering a question. So once you ask yourself a question, your brain will find an answer. It might not be immediate, but it will find an answer. So question 1 is, how can I prevent? And then you fill in the blank with one of the pain points that you've written down from happening. And question 2 is, what will I do when that pain point happens? And you answer the question for yourself. Now, as I said, you can do this alone with yourself. You can do this alone with yourself to prepare your mitigating strategies. And ideally, you would do this with your manager and your team so that you can create a team agreement about what you're going to do. So I hope you found this training helpful. In part 1, we created awareness about how much time you and your manager are spending on meetings and meeting-related tasks, and also some of the things that are getting in the way of effective meetings, because it's exactly the pain points and the frustrations that you wrote down that are the things that are causing your meetings to go off track. And the beautiful thing about awareness is that once we're aware of something, we can choose to change it. And that moved us on to part 2, where I gave you 4 meeting medicines, which if you implement, you will change those bad meeting habits into good. And we remembered those 4 meeting medicines with the acronym COPE. So C for captain, O for outcome, P for process and plan, and E for equity of thought. And we looked at how you can help your manager, support them so that they do remember to articulate the intended outcome of the meeting. They do think about how the process of how they're going to achieve that outcome, and they do think about how they're going to get equity of thought in their meetings. And then finally, we moved to part 3, which is where you created a team agreement, and even a team agreement with yourself, so that you can prevent some of these problems from happening in the first place. Since we're now aware of them, we know they're going to happen, we can decide what we're going to do to prevent it or how to manage it when it does happen. So thank you for watching this session. I hope you found it useful. And I've created a little resource for you, which is called How to Find Your Superpower. Now, I've said several times in this training that questions are transformative because the brain cannot resist answering questions. So in this free resource, I'm asking you a series of questions, and your answers to them will help you find your superpower. And the wonderful thing is that it's also related to your values. When you combine your superpower with your values, there's really nothing that you can't achieve. So if you would like that free resource, please reach out to me. I've got my contact details here, and I'll be delighted to send it to you. And also, if your teams are struggling having effective meetings and really are serious about getting more productive and more results driven, then please contact me. I'd be delighted to help. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.